Greetings and salutations, viewers and listeners. Welcome to episode 104 of Word Ninjas Live. I am your regular host and instigator of creative productivity, Charles. And joining me tonight are my co-hosts, Will.
Hello.
Justin, with an actual working lower third.
Yeah, I don't know if it's Windows 10 or the new Google, but it seems to be working twice in a row now.
And Calvin.
Hello, everybody.
Now, two of us have managed to survive yet another convention. Somehow. Not quite sure how, but rather glad that we did.
All I know is that my body has not quite recovered yet.
Yeah, I don't know what the driving equivalent of jet lag is, but I still have it.
Especially because I went basically straight to work after returning. Literally.
We wanted to do just a quick little convention review for AkaiCon, since it happened this past weekend. Let's see. Back to the show notes, because I forget what my notes were. There was a lot of great things about AkaiCon. We got to meet up with a fair portion of the Fairy Tale podcast crew and a decent portion of the OTP manga crew as well, which was ridiculous. But in a good way.
The good kind of ridiculous.
Yes. And it was dangerous in that you put a lot of creative people all together for an entire weekend, and some very interesting ideas come out of it. Which hopefully is a good thing. But we got a lot of interesting concepts that we get to play around with now.
Oh, yeah.
And I also got to test out my new camcorder setup, which I think works pretty well. I was kind of impressed with how well that camcorder could take just everything I threw at it.
Yeah, I say you got a good one there, most definitely.
So with a 32 gigabyte internal drive, we didn't even fill that up. There was still the two extra 64 gigs each and all that. But then again, I wasn't recording for an entire day. I would swap that out for my camera, which does not work as well. My camera is senile and does not like to take photos.
Really?
Well, a majority of the photos either it couldn't get the shutter speed figured out properly for some reason, or if there was any window within the shot, it completely overpowered everything else in the photo. Like, I have shots of Calvin doing his audio tech magic, but he is just a black shadow outline against a heavenly white window.
Yeah, that's the fun part of DSLR cameras. Unless you go manual, any sort of automatic settings that the camera tries to use to compensate for, like, basically a very sunny window or any sort of sunny background, it's gonna overcompensate and underexpose.
Yeah, and I didn't really have the patience to go manual with that at the time, but I might have to in the future because I'm not getting a new DSLR anytime soon. But
it's definitely worth learning the manual settings. Manual is your friend.
Well, I'm used to my SLR, which is all manual, so won't be too much of a shift.
Yeah, you should have it down pat in that case.
And one of the biggest things for this convention was getting there and back, because flight is not exactly reliable, or at least it has not been in my experience every single time I've tried to do a convention down in Atlanta or Tennessee or anywhere down that way. So Yeah, that was an adventure, a 1,947-mile adventure across 6 or 7 states.
I was, think at last count it was seven. Let's see. Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Virginia, and Tennessee.
And we might have peeked into Maryland for a short bit. I'm not quite sure.
With a possibility of eight.
Hmm.
Good grief.
But as far as conventions go, I thought it was a lot of fun, and they had a lot of good content, a lot of fun vendors. The communications were a bit spazzy here and there, at least from our end, or at least from my end. I'm not going to speak for Calvin, but it looks like a majority of our complicated concerns are going to be easily addressed for next year based off of who's going to be coordinating a lot of things. So
Hmm.
I'm not too worried about it. And we've learned how to adapt and just roll with things as it is. So, what's your perspective on the convention, Calvin?
I kind of feel like I was out of my element a little bit because one, I was in a completely different state, and two, I was probably like ungodly tired and exhausted from that drive.
Yeah, another state,
So
another time zone, even.
yeah, so it took a while to adjust and kind of get used to everything, and like it was also very overwhelming meeting everybody.
Yeah, it's a very energetic group, but in a good way.
More energy that I was willing to exert at the moment, at least until Saturday rolled around anyway.
And I know
Um,
that Richie and his various crews, I think, had 7 or 8 panels altogether that weekend.
yeah.
So we were running around pretty regularly with them as well, just for that alone. Never mind having press badges.
Mm. And for most conventions, I do my usual spiel of like stopping everyone I can to take a picture. But I don't know. I just I don't know. It just really felt off this time around, and I didn't take nearly as many pictures as I usually do. But I was able to flag a few people down, talk to some people. So the little socialization that I was able to muster up actually fared pretty well. So I was happy with that.
Oh, there we go.
The fun parts, there are plenty of fun parts. Sitting in on some of the panels, watching Richie like, go off on a tangent in person several times.
I think every panel at least once, and I helped.
Yep. Yeah, one thing we both learned about ourselves. Apparently, pink wigs seem to be our thing.
You still wear it better than I do.
Uh, only by a small margin. But all in all, it was a really fun time, a really awesome convention, meeting everybody, meeting even more people outside of OTP and Fairy Tale Podcast, getting some fresh air for once. Like you don't realize like how great air can be until you leave New York for a few days, and then the second you set into Brooklyn, oh hey, it smells like hot garbage around here.
Or just Manhattan.
Yeah.
That was an adventure and a half. Trying to get cross town. I made it. I only ran one red light because I didn't realize there was one right after a turn.
Mm.
Literally like 12 feet after the turn, there's a red light.
Seeing as how it's Manhattan, I'm not terribly surprised.
Neither am I in retrospect, but still,
I'm I'm sure you weren't terribly pleased about that one.
no. And I think next year, if we go, we'll try and space things out a little better so maybe we can actually see more of the area rather than just get to the hotel, crash, do convention, get back home, crash. It would be nice to fit in a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, to be fair, we did make it to Zaxby's.
True, and it was delicious, but it did not agree with my stomach even remotely.
Okay, so it wasn't just me.
No, no, that stuff tried to kill me, and I did not appreciate it. But it was tasty. I just wouldn't necessarily want to do it again.
For the uninitiated, Zaxby's is a fast food chain in the southern states where their main claim to fame is the various forms that they cook chicken, and only chicken. They do no other meat but chicken.
And it was very good chicken.
I kind of figured my stomach was not agreeing. My stomach wasn't happy because of everything I ate.
Also, we'd been doing a convention diet for like 3 days, so that was probably catching up to us.
Ah, yeah, that's true too.
But yeah, overall, I think AkaiCon was a lot of fun. And it seemed to go over pretty well from at least my experiences and all the people I interacted with. The interaction with staff from my end was very minimal, so I didn't have to actually deal with any of the apparent complications or shenanigans, which is why I can't really speak much to that.
Hmm.
But I wouldn't mind going back again next year.
There. Hopefully by next year I will have a few more miles under my belt in terms of driving.
And who knows, maybe we can kidnap someone else like Justin to go on a road trip with us.
That sounds exciting, but also frightening and horrific. Mostly horrific.
Well, we're both perfectly fine drivers.
I'm a good driver. I'm not. It's not that part I'm worried about. Just drop me a 5 hour energy, and I'll take the night shift. Just put me in the back, because I'll be sleeping the rest of the trip if I do that.
What's funny is I actually took the night shift. Night shift after the graveyard shift actually wasn't bad.
Yeah,
Actually,
No,
because
if you're not tired and
fine.
slipping off the road, it's actually pretty fine.
No, that wasn't my issue. I'm like, I do the graveyard shift just on a regular basis. But the hard part was the several hours of torrential downpours on the way to Tennessee
and back.
and back. Going back wasn't so bad. It was the downpour only hit toward the end,
Yeah,
but
because that was my turn.
but you missed the downpour. I caught the whole thing,
Fair enough.
both ways. You got no rain. Zero rain whatsoever. I don't know if there is just this one rain cloud just hovering around Virginia that was like waiting for people to pass through 81, but it definitely got me. It got me good. Jesus.
Well, hopefully it won't be there next year. We shall see. But yeah, overall, I would highly recommend AkaiCon. It was a lot of fun.
As would I.
And now onwards to our talkie point. I think I'm just going to turn my phone off in the future because I literally made sure that I turned it to silent so that it would not vibrate, it would not make noise, it would not respond to anything. But Google likes to ignore that for some reason, which is incredibly frustrating, I'm sure, for everyone, including the audio editor.
I was at a large company meeting with a client, and their customer was also there. Oh, that's I can fix that. Speaking of noises. And I put my phone on silent. I said, no interruptions, silent. Apparently, apps on your phone ignore that setting because Pandora somehow got turned on in my pocket and started playing music while I was presenting to a very large international company. And it was not great.
It was not well received.
Actually, it was well received. It was very embarrassing, but they had a good time with it, and they made fun of me for the rest of the day. And I will go address that sound. I'll be back.
All right. While Justin does that, let's migrate to the talkie point for this week. Now, we're still kind of dialing in a bit as to just how the format for our show is going. The little convention review is kind of a one-off thing whenever we have a convention, but our talkie points, I think we are going to dial back down to just one per week going forward, or at least for a little while. We'll see how it goes. We're still experimenting, but I know Calvin and I were talking about it for a good while on our excursions, and we feel like talking in greater detail about one topic is going to be more fun for everyone, both us and listeners, rather than trying to cover multiple topics and just kind of scattershotting everything. So we're going to try this new format out and really do one topic for a while. And the topic for this week is basically, what is steampunk? And just where is the line between all the various punks that are out there now? And we did some digging, and I know I've heard of steampunk, and I know that there was a cyberpunk at one point, or there still is, but apparently steampunk kind of originated from cyberpunk, along with all the other punk. Cyberpunk was kind of the grandfather punk of all literary genres, or literary punk genres anyway. And the deeper I dove, at least for me, the more ridiculous the whole punk subgenre classes started becoming. There is a punk. Basically, you can just tack anything on before punk, and hey, that's a new subgenre. It's basically, I see it as a new way of classifying a lot of fantasy stories. It's a new way of kind of divvying them up, or a different way, not a new way, because they have steampunk, cyberpunk, nanopunk, diesel punk, coal punk, silk punk, which I'm still very intrigued by. There's bronze punk, which apparently the movie 300 is considered part of. There is stone punk, so think of like The Land Before Time, stuff like that. It really seems to boil down to a level of technology or some sort of cultural aesthetic. That is your focus, and then you toss punk after it. At least from what I've seen.
I was kind of feeling the same way when I was reading this, like, oh great, someone took, I was going to say steampunk, but cyberpunk was first, and kind of ran with it. And at first it's like, oh yes, cyberpunk, steampunk, it's okay, but now everything is punk. But as I was reading it, I was like, well, I guess it's not like in there it says the Flintstones are stone punk, which might be pushing it a little bit.
I can
Um,
I can see that. I can see that one actually.
it works because it's like the Stone Age, but with a lot of modern ideas about bureaucracy and government and stuff like that. So it's a melding. It's like modern day, but technology stayed in the Stone Age, but other concepts advanced to modern.
Mm.
And that's, I think, kind of what they're getting at with the punk genre is where you take a level of technology or aesthetic and then apply it to modern that's not modern and then apply it to modern day rules or kind of break the rules. Like steampunk, all the steampunk machines are way more advanced than anything we actually had when steam powered technology was a thing, despite what movies like Wild Wild West would have us believe.
Wait, you mean that wasn't a historical documentary?
I think they may have exaggerated a small amount.
Aw.
Just a little bit, a little bit. But I think I decided for the most part I'd allow it, considering people don't go crazy with it, as just kind of like a general subgenre thing of applying different aesthetics and technologies to a modern ideal or something like that.
Like a modern day interpretation of the technology of the past.
Right. Like, I can't attest to 300 being bronze punk because I never saw that movie.
Cinematically, it was very impressive. But that
In terms
was.
of
I
yeah,
mean,
in terms of
yes,
punk element, I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
they had like bronze level weaponry, sort of, or at least bronze colored, really. I don't
That
think
was
their
basically
weapon.
it.
I don't think their weaponry was technically bronze. That would have been way too brittle for them. I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure they must have at
weapons
least had
weren't made
iron
out
by
of
that point.
it would have been iron and then later steel.
Yeah. I mean, they were bronze colored, but I don't think that's enough to really technically fit under the punk aesthetic in this stuff for what we're interpreting it as.
Hmm. The one that's on this list, we have a bunch of lists in the podcast and the show notes, and one of them is cyberpunk derivatives from Wikipedia, and one of them is now punk, which basically says anything now. Now is now punk.
That one made me sigh.
That one's a little unnecessary. Stuff like the steampunk or diesel punk is interesting. It's like a variation of steampunk, only with more, instead of steam powered technology, it's more of the diesel powered technology of around World War One, World War Two.
Yeah. And I mean, a punk based off of the primary energy source, that I can feel is very easily, uh, you can very easily divvy those up. Because, I mean, coal is pretty stylized, diesel is pretty stylized. Steam, that has a little more leeway depending on how you create the steam. Same for the cyberpunk, that isn't really an energy so much as future tech.
Electricity.
Yeah.
It sounds better than electricity punk.
Electropunk.
Well, that sounds kind of cool.
That actually sounds like a music genre.
That's what I was thinking.
Calvin, get on that.
What's interesting about
Okay.
the difference between like the cyberpunk genre and the steampunk genre is that the steampunk genre implies or typically implies an alternative history based on technological advances. So the steampunk genre can technically exist, and be in modern day time. It's a matter of what technology was accepted and developed, and what actually, ran forward. That's why steampunk and diesel punk would be good in that sense. And it doesn't even necessarily have to be an energy source. It can be any, major technological advance. What is interesting is that cyberpunk is different in that it's typically based on future events where an alternative history doesn't really exist yet. So I think because of that, what you've gotten is a very loose definition of the term punk that can be applied to just about anything except historical nonfiction. Like what you said, how the idea of sword and sorcery is fading away, and now it's silk punk or any of the other various ones.
Yeah, sword and sorcery is like the umbrella description for a lot of stories. Sort of like it's fantasy, and then like sword and sorcery is a little smaller, and then inside sword and sorcery there's 50 billion punks now vying for attention, which would be an interesting plot within itself, but that's besides the point. But yeah, a lot of all the resources that we pulled from are linked in the show notes for this episode if you want to get lost amidst Wikipedia and a few other websites that we found to try and explain steampunk and the various other punks. One of the proposed cyberpunk derivatives made me upset just by how ridiculous it sounded, dreampunk, which is one of the last ones, but when they reference an example as Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, I can kind of see how that would work, because it really does have dream logic to it. So even the more ridiculous ones are ones that feel like a stretch. There are writers that can actually write to that derivative style, I think, which is very interesting considering there's some pretty weird derivatives.
I think the one thing that hurts my head is the idea of taking literature that already exists, that already has a genre, like Alice in Wonderland, which I believe is just fantasy, I suppose, or just general fiction, and taking something like that and then trying to add it to a newly defined genre, like dreampunk. I don't know, that feels weird, maybe forced. Like you're just trying to have a big name to identify your genre as legitimate and not just something you're making up to fit into, fit in. It's like, oh yeah, I write dreampunk, and people are like, what's dreampunk? So you can't go, like, oh, Alice in Wonderland was dreampunk, and everyone knows Alice in Wonderland.
I wonder what the Lovecraftian mythos would fall under.
I think Lovecraftian has become its own genre now, too.
But if people try to shoehorn previous works into new punks, it's inevitable.
Nightmare punk.
That would work. So, amidst all the various punks that are out there in literary style, what are some books or movies or just media in general that the crew has consumed that would fall under one of these punks? I mean, the ones that mainly came to my mind were Devin Monk's Age of Steam series, which is steampunk, and I'm about 3/4 of the way through A Midsummer's Night Steampunk, which was from one of the Humble bundles from a while ago, which is steampunk and has a lot of clockwork style focus to it, which is pretty cool. And it seems to generally be classified as cyberpunk, but the graphic novel series Transmetropolitan is fantastic, and people should read it. But those are the main ones that came to mind for me, at least, amidst all the ridiculous things that I've read, because a lot of it I still feel falls under sword and sorcery, because that is the primary powers in those stories. Usually more sorcery than sword. How about other people's?
I couldn't even think of anything I've read that I would classify as any kind of punk. I've read a lot of stuff, but none of it I feel fits into those genres. Like, I've read all of R.A. Salvatore's The Legacy of Drizzt,
I would fit
and
that under sword and sorcery as well.
yeah, it's sword and sorcery or fantasy, if that's what you want to call it. I saw on that list an elf punk, but
Yep.
even that description said, like, mythical creatures in a modern day setting. Like, what if elves and dwarves existed in New York City right now?
Mm.
Where this is elves and dwarves living in a fantastic world that doesn't exist with no modern amenities at all. And I don't even think they have indoor plumbing.
Someday.
The elves might have it figured out. Maybe the gnomes. Gnomes. I couldn't think of any. Like, I've read some of Michael Crichton's stuff. I wouldn't classify like Jurassic Park or the Andromeda Strain or anything like that. That's not a punk at all. Interesting, but it's just science fiction.
I'm sure people would want to toss a Dino Punk sticker on it if they could.
But it's just science fiction.
Mm.
And I've read a lot of things. I read an older the Tripod trilogy, which some people might try to classify it as something, but I don't really. Maybe that might be the closest thing to a punk. That one was weird. The basic plot is that, for those who aren't familiar with it, aliens have taken over the world a long time ago, and in order to keep humans under control, they've reverted human technology back to kind of I think the most advanced technology humans were allowed to have were wind-up clocks and watches. So no electricity, no battery power, nothing like that. Just to kind of keep people in line. Oh, and brainwashing. Brainwashing works really well at keeping people docile and in line. They did that too. It's a good little series. I think it was a young adult series. But yeah, nothing literary-wise. I had some other forms of media that I think fit into punk. Some of these were even listed in some of those lists. People who have been watching our Game Break series know I've been playing BioShock. That kind of fit into the deco punk, which is kind of like diesel punk, but more of like the art aesthetic. Because like diesel punk is nitty and gritty and dirty and diesel engines and all that, and deco punk is more of the same time period, but the art behind it, the neon lights and the smooth lines and the clean look of the 1950s and whatnot.
I don't know. Rapture's gotten pretty grungy.
Every time I go through it and I see the worn out places and I see, in my mind, I try to see what this place looked like before it fell apart. And it looked, like in my head I see that it looked pretty nice before it fell apart.
Speaking of falling apart, do you think the punk in all of these, subgenres imply sort of a dystopia?
One of the definitions in our list defined, I forget if it was cyberpunk or steampunk, the two parts, and they did have a specific definition for what made it punk, but now I don't remember which link it was and I couldn't find it again.
Maybe that's what it is, because the cyberpunk books that I'm reading are very much dystopian in nature.
It did say something about being dystopian, breaking off, rebelling against, basically being a punk.
Yeah, whether you're the rebels fighting against the Imperials or breaking away from society. I think that has to be considered to be a punk genre.
It also fits again with BioShock because Rapture is very dystopian at this point, or just very post-apocalyptic in a way.
Hmm.
Fallout was on their list as Atom Punk, which makes sense. Because everything's more kind of nuclear powered and energy powered, but also has kind of a 1950s Cold War aesthetic to it.
Yeah.
I put Fable 3 down because it had a bit of diesel punk. I originally thought steampunk, but I guess diesel makes more sense. Not really as a main theme in the background, but kind of a back theme because it was very Industrial Revolution era for that world in Fable 3. But it was definitely very early Industrial Revolution. There was a lot of like, what do we do with all this waste and runoff? And hey, we have indoor plumbing now, but we don't know where to dump it. And hey, children are small and nimble. Let's have them work in factories in really dangerous conditions. That's fine. That's fine. And for movies, for steampunk, Steam Boy.
Yeah.
I couldn't think of any books I've read that fit into any punk genres.
How about the rest of the crew?
Right now, I'm currently reading a series of books called the Ware series. I'm currently reading Software, with the sequel being Wetware, which I hope doesn't imply what I think it implies. And I consider those classic pulp cyberpunk. So they're extremely old when cyberpunk was just starting to be a thing, and I consider them pulp because they're extremely short and very interesting. They don't have any boundaries, and nothing's off limits with these books. Violence and sexual and everything, it's all in there.
So about what we expected when we saw those on the shelf?
Yes, they are exactly as advertised, and they're actually very fun. And I'm looking forward to finishing Software and starting to read Wetware. Another series that I would consider punk in nature would be the Dark Tower series. However, I think that it visits so many different genres depending on which part of the world of Endworld they're in. And they even like snap back into current day New York and jump into the past somewhat. That I decided to call it meta punk because I hear you can just throw the word meta onto anything and then it means all the things. And self-referencing, which I think the Dark Tower series, if any book can be considered self-referencing, it would be this one. And then sort of as a joke, for when Will was talking about video games, I added Super Meat Boy. I would consider meat punk, where the alternative dystopian future is everyone's made of meat, and the world is filled with saw blades and grinders and exposed poisonous needles.
I wonder if we would then have Battle Block Theater as block punk.
I don't see why not. It has to be dystopian in nature, though.
It's pretty well.
I don't think VVVV would count.
Yeah.
He's just trapped on a ship or something.
Trapped on a
it's
ship
kind of
that
like
broke
weird
apart.
interdimensional.
But dimensional punk sounds weird. The TV show Sliders would have been dimensional punk.
Only in certain episodes because they weren't always in a dystopian world.
True. Just most of the time.
So with that thinking, would Infinity's Light technically fall under dimensional punk?
Depends on how dystopian it gets.
Well, I believe you've read further in the chapters than I have, so you would probably know better.
Yeah, I'm up to current. So many questions. It hasn't really gone dystopian yet, but I can foresee that it could. It has the potential to, depending on just how certain plot points play out. But they're still pretty early on in the character growth stages.
Okay. Fair enough.
And I know that in the car we joked that Ash and Sky may end up being cross-genre punk because we have silk punk level technology, we have steampunk level technology. There was coal punk level technology, but that's kind of burnt out because they ran out of coal.
I was going to say powder punk is probably, gunpowder age, starting into the explosive stuff. That might have a lot of overlap with silk punk, though, probably.
Yeah. And I know there's also going to be some solar powered stuff, but I'm not quite sure how that's going to fit in yet. It's still in the works. But it is.
Imagining solar powered suits of armor and weapons.
You never know.
Nighttime is the safest time.
That's when everyone goes to the burlesque tea shop to hide in safety.
Well, none of the guns work during the night, so. But at least it's environmentally friendly.
True.
Does that mean we can have a wind punk that's wind powered too?
Yeah, that was going to be part of the Sky Pirates. They figured out they've kind of mastered air compression somehow.
The sky's the limits, really.
Mm-hmm.
And to our viewers and listeners out there, what is your definition of steampunk or any other punk style genre that you happen to appreciate? And what have you read or watched or played in that genre or style? Post in the comments. Let us know. Continue the conversation.
I actually have somewhat of a definition for steampunk. Well, an explanation more so from the author that actually coined steampunk, K.W. Jeter. I've been reading Infernal Devices as of late. Excuse me. And he spoke in pseudo length about how the term steampunk came about. I'll just read a quick this one paragraph here. He went on a lot about it, and it was really interesting. So anybody who's interested in reading it, I suggest you go purchase Infernal Devices. Really damn good book so far. But here we go. My coining back in 1987 of the word steampunk originally might have been more of a humorous jab at a tendency going around those days of labeling any two genre writers with more in common than bipedal locomotion as the insert word here punk movement. But if it assumed some sort of life after that, or at least clawed itself up from whatever grave in which old jokes are laid to rest, well, it could have been worse lexicographically.
Well put.
He goes into steampunk a lot more, and the sudden rise, like the surprising rise of it, and reasons behind how it started becoming so popular, which had more to do with Hollywood and less about authors. But still, very interesting read nonetheless.
Cool.
As an aside, before we move forward, I went on sort of a Wikipedia tangent quest during the segment, and I found a few things. One, and this I think I knew already, the Jurassic Park series is considered a techno-thriller, which combines aspects of thriller novels like most Michael Crichton, and there were a couple other examples. Tom Clancy, combining, technology and the thriller genre. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with all of that, but the end of this chain of Wikipedia links that I kept clicking on over and over again. I don't know if you remember many, many weeks ago, I was talking about how I wanted to write a fantasy and horror sort of in the same world. And we were talking about things like The Dark Tower being an example of that, where it combines aspects of fantasy and horror in an interesting way. Well, it turns out that dark fantasy is an existing subgenre, where some of them focus more on the horror side and some focus more on the fantasy side. And there's actually a pretty decently referenced Wikipedia article of books that I should probably get into and read. For example, they mention Neil Gaiman's The Sandman as a horror-based dark fantasy. Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. There ends up being a lot of monster killing other people based stuff there. But on the fantasy side of things, there's just sort of more, typical sword and sorcery and high fantasy, but with darker, more dreary elements in it. One might even say Game of Thrones could fall under that. But they consider H.P. Lovecraft under the dark fantasy genre. I mean, this is just according to the Wikipedia article, so don't take this with a grain of salt. Some of the Clive Barker novels, Fairy Tale, and then they list a bunch of games like the Diablo franchise and Dragon Age, which is sort of fantasy with adult and sometimes violent themes and horrible horror elements.
Interesting.
I was happy to find a genre that I can actually probably do some research and maybe read some of these books. I've been meaning to read Sandman, and it's about time I go ahead and do that.
Oh, it's a fun series. I think you'd be able to appreciate a lot of it. All right. With that, let's move on to the highlights reel for this week. Because there's some interesting things going on that we found. First of which is one of J.R.R. Tolkien's stories is being published this year. And it's an unfinished story, but it's one that has not really previously been published to the public. Because he was a writing machine. He has so many stories and drafts and concepts and little things that he was working on that we've just never seen. But it looks like the story of Kullervo is going to be released in the fall of this year. So if you're a fan of Tolkien, beyond just The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, this might be of interest for you. I know I appreciate a fair portion of Tolkien, but there are certain stories that I just cannot get through, like the Silmarillion. I have tried several times, just can't get through it for one reason or another. So if they ever do a movie series of the Silmarillion, I would happily pay to see that in its 20 installments that they would eventually have to make. Let's see, this comes out October 27th, so just a couple months away. And there's new story bundles and book bundles out this week.
Before we move on,
yes.
Do we know if anyone finished it for him, or did they leave it unfinished?
Let's see here.
I don't remember it saying anything in this article about that.
It does not specify.
Also that he wrote this well before the Silmarillion.
Yeah. This was apparently a piece that he then used to base a lot of the Silmarillion and other stuff off of. So it's probably going to be a very early style work, a little rough around the edges most likely compared to some of his other pieces.
Almost like a jumping board for him.
It'll be interesting to read it from that perspective to see how he progressed from this onwards to the Silmarillion and the Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and the various other unfinished tales and stories that he put together.
I remember in the little quote they have there something about how this would kind of be like akin to the First Age, I think he said.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty interesting.
Well, in a few months, we'll be able to check it out and see just what it's all about and how finished and polished it is, or not, depending on how much they poked it. And the Story Bundle has tossed out a new bundle recently, I think today. This one on funny books. So, humor. But kind of weird humor. We got The Devastator Horror by The Devastator. Hopefully that's not their legal name, because that would get very complicated. You get Fight by Sam Spina, Restart Me Up by Leslie Tessina, which is all about Windows 95. You get Horrid Little Stories by David Malky. And those you pay $1 or more, you get those 4 books. If you pay, I believe it's $12 or more, you get the second tier. Yep. $12 or more, you get the second tier, which has Tiny Kitten Teeth by Frank Gibson and Becky Drystad. The Center for Otherworld Science, issues 1 through 3 by Xingyin Kor. Nobody Can Eat 50 Eggs by Steve Steiner. And Science, Ruining Everything Since 1543 by Zach Weinersmith.
One makes me want to read it.
Which one?
The last 2.
Ah.
Nobody Can Eat 50 Eggs and Science Ruining Everything Since 1543.
Yeah, well, the last one is just a lot of science-related strips from SMBC. So
it could still be entertaining.
Gotta love Saturday morning breakfast cereal. Always a fun time. And Humble Bundle just released a new one as well, which I kind of really sort of want, because it is all about the Dungeons and the Dragons.
Very fantasy.
Yes. This is not elf punk.
No. Though I have 2 of the books on the overall list already.
But similar to Story Bundle, the first row you pay $1 or more. Then you get 5 books in this case. If you pay the average, which changes depending on when you're looking at it. At the moment, it is $9.88. You get the second tier, and they add more throughout the time. Or you can go all out and pay $12 and get the first 2 tiers and the third tier. Let's see. The first tier, which is $1 and up, is Dungeons and Dragons: The Legend of Drizzt, Volume 1, Homeland. So the book Homeland in graphic novel form. You'd also get Dungeons and Dragons: Legends of Baldur's Gate. You'd also get Dungeons and Dragons Volume 1, Shadow Plague. And then just Dungeons and Dragons Volume 2 and Dungeons and Dragons Volume 3. For $1, you could get all 5 of those. If you were to pay the average price, you'd also get Dungeons and Dragons: The Legend of Drizzt, Neverwinter Tales, which is my favorite part of that entire ridiculously long series at this point, because that's the first one that I got to read. You get Dungeons and Dragons: Forgotten Realms Volume 1, and then Forgotten Realms Classics Volume 1, Forgotten Realms Classics Volume 2, and Dungeons and Dragons Cutter, and then more comics as they add them throughout this week and next. And 13 days altogether, so the next 2 weeks. If you were to go all out and pay $12 or more, you would get all of those books plus The Legend of Drizzt Volume 2, Exile. And then Dungeons and Dragons Classics Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, and Volume 4, and Forgotten Realms Classics Volume 3 and Forgotten Realms Classics Volume 4. That is a lot of Dungeons and Dragons for $12.
Having read most of the Legacy of Drist, the Dungeons and Dragons Cutter also really interests me because it's technically a spin-off of one of the novels.
Nice.
Well, I flipped through this list earlier, but I missed that it was called Cutter, but I recognized the name immediately as the nickname for a very powerful and dangerous sword in the series.
So yeah, if you're a Dungeons and Dragons fan or Legend of Drist, this might be for you. You have 2 whole weeks as of this recording to check it out. I might get this one, because for $12, that's pretty good for that much content. Plus whatever else they toss in before the end. Next up is a GoFundMe fundraiser for a screen printing workshop that focuses on literary t-shirts. And they're very close to actually hitting their goal at the moment, 235 out of 300. But as per most fundraisers, they have various donation levels, depending on how much you'd like to donate. If you are interested in helping out with their screen printed t-shirts of literary amusement, I wouldn't mind the Raven one, because I do like me some Edgar Allan Poe. And the link for this one is in the show notes, of course, and it's gofundme.com/Mariana Sierra. And the last one is also a fundraiser. This one is a little farther away from their goal, but they also have 51 days to go. But OTP Manga's fundraiser. I'm going to kind of be poking and pimping this one for a couple episodes worth because we recently pitched the Ashen Sky visual novel for the manga adaptation, so we're becoming even more involved with them. So if you're interested in manga that is also adapted for dubs and has a ridiculously good soundtrack behind it, thanks to Calvin, and they're doing everything possible to make it a really cool experience. And as their proofreader, I'm going to have a lot of fun reading all those stories. Hopefully without too many cliffhangers after every single chapter, because I want to know more. And that one's over on Indiegogo, and the links for all of these in the show notes under the highlights reel section for episode 104. And with that, onwards to where's the show notes? The Productivity and Inspiration Station, where we get to talk about our various highlights and what we've done over the past week. I know it was already mentioned, but we survived AkaiCon 2015. That is an accomplishment, considering travel. And while on that travel, I managed to figure out several character profiles for Ashen Sky. And as I said before, pitched it to OTP Manga for the potential manga adaptation. Probably get that solidified more by the end of this month and into next month, so we'll have more to talk about that then.
Can I just take a moment to chuckle at the fact that you pronounced manga 2 different ways in one sentence?
Oh, and Richie's not editing this anymore, so he can't cringe.
You went, I pitched it to OTP Manga for the manga adaptation.
Sometimes I do that on purpose, sometimes I really don't. And I don't even realize it until people call me out on it.
I'd imagine you do it on purpose around Richie a lot more often, huh?
Mainly because at this point I keep forgetting which one's the actual proper pronunciation because I use them interchangeably so often.
It's probably technically manga,
Hmm.
but you know, the American accent would probably have us going manga because it's so close to like mango.
That's probably why I say OTP manga, because that's how I've heard that name pronounced.
Hmm.
But whenever I talk about manga, that's how I hear it pronounced.
That's how most normal Americans pronounce it, even if it's not the proper Japanese pronunciation, because we're American. It's our American accent.
Hmm.
Yeah, most words that have ang are pronounced ang.
In America.
Anger, angle, mangoes.
Onger. That does sound weird.
Yeah. So next time Richie gives you trouble about it, just tell him that that's my English
Burger.
accent. You're just gonna have to deal with it. I'm an American, damn it.
That's my Connecticut accent. Deal with it.
Exactly.
And also during the weekend, I actually, with thanks to Calvin and some of the guests that we met there, figured out some ideas for how we can evolve our panels in the future, including how we could gamify the Literotica panel, which I think would be a lot of fun.
More about this.
Yeah. And also evolving the plot in 60 minutes workshop into something that we can actually fit in an hour, because we say it's plot in 60 minutes, but it takes us an hour and a half with intros, outros, interstitials, and stuff like that. And also a new series called Lightning and Thunder, which we have an audio recording from the drive explaining how that's going to work. We're going to go into more detail about that on a future episode once we have that a little more solidified and figured out. But it would be an informational 5 to 10 minute animated series that we have to play with in the future. And we also recently got to interview the fabulous people over at Inconceivable. We were not able to do a video recording, so we didn't live stream it or anything, but we do have the audio recording, and we're pushing to get that on the iTunes feed for the NSFWN episode for this month. So it's been a very interesting week, all things considered. What has Will been up to since last week?
I've been pretty busy. For one thing, I've been writing more, which, since I had to take almost a month off from writing because of real-life shenanigans, I'm thankful for. Also working out a new method to improve writing productivity that mostly involves getting away from my damn computer. You know, in the past I've said that one of the methods I used for writing would be to put on like a Let's Play series of one of the Let's Players I like. Just let that play in the background while writing, and in the past that has worked, but right now it's not. I don't know if it's because I'm watching a different Let's Player that's maybe more distracting. I'm not sure, but getting away from the computer is helping. Sitting down on the couch and just watching a movie I've seen already and don't have to pay 100% attention to is helping, because it's giving me background noise, and I can look up and watch it if I need to think, but I don't need to pay attention to it because I already know what happens. Netflix is almost my friend if it had the movies I actually wanted to watch available for streaming. That and the search feature on the Wii U version of the Netflix app doesn't work.
Well, that's no good.
I searched for an actor's name. It brought his name and had a quick list of movies they had with him in it, with a button to view more, so I can better see all the movies. Click on that, and it just gives me a blank page. I go back, it has the actor still, but it says there are no movies for him.
Okay.
Also, it said they had National Treasure, but if I search for Nicolas Cage, National Treasure doesn't come up.
Huh.
So, I've heard it's just the Wii U's app that the search doesn't 100% work for. Like if you're on a PC or the Xbox or something, it works. It's just the Wii U version. which is, of course, what I was streaming on, but fine.
Hmm.
But either way, I'm getting more writing done. I'm working pretty well on the rough draft of a short story I'm working on.
Yay.
Also, more Game Break. Part 2 of Bioshock 2 should have gone up yesterday.
Yep.
Okay, so it went up yesterday. I'm still fine-tuning, editing things, but I'm figuring out a flow for how to get the new system to work. And it definitely takes more time than the previous system, but I'm streamlining it as much as I can. And I'm liking the end results. There's still a few things that I might be able to do, might not be able to do in Movie Studio 13. I got to play around with that, mostly involving sound levels. They're good right now, but I feel like they could be better. As long as I can make them better without it taking forever to do. Also, I may have to talk to Calvin about rendering rates. Just some side questions, but I'll save that for off the air. And I had inspiration for a dangerous crossover, which is appropriate because I mentioned mentioned these things before. But a while back, I got to wondering, what if Bioshock and Fallout took place in the same universe? I don't have anything fleshed out. I'm going to put it out there and let anyone who's interested play with it as they see fit. But what if, hypothetically, Rapture was co-funded by Vault-Tec as an experimental underwater vault with aid from Andrew Ryan's funding, and it was his idea, but he pitched it to Vault-Tec, or works for Vault-Tec?
That would be dangerous.
And I'll leave that vague idea, that vague hypothetical out there, and anyone can play with it as they see fit, if they're any familiar with Bioshock, or Fallout, or both, or neither.
I'd be intrigued by the
It's like a bonus muse food.
Yeah, it's kind of like a little bonus muse food I had in my head.
The concept of being able to use plasmids in the wasteland. That would be fun.
It got me thinking because, like, Bioshock, Rapture was in its prime in the 1950s. Like, in the game, it fell. Like, the first major event that caused its downfall was the New Year's Eve 1959. And basically all through 1959 was when it fell down. And then in Bioshock 1, we first show up in 1960. And I know Fallout technically takes place like in the year 22 whatever, but everything kind of has a 1950s aesthetic. So I could see it, because they both have the same aesthetic. If you wanted to play around with dates, you could make it work. And I think it would be interesting to mix plasmids, and you could also take Fallout robots and put them in Rapture.
Pretty easily.
And then give them plasmids.
Just don't give the behemoths or Deathclaws plasmids.
You could have underwater Deathclaws.
No, thank you.
But that was that was for the inspiration. I'm inspiring everybody with that idea. I was inspired, and I'm sharing the inspiration.
What has Justin been up to since last week?
Not a ton this weekend, which is usually my productivity time and fun time for inspiration. I actually went to a friend's house and chilled out. A friend of mine from college, who some of you probably know who I'm talking about. And it was good to relax again. But I'm now back on my A game at work, which is good, because I need to be, because there's currently 14 concurrent projects, and then we only have 10 people on staff. So that makes things interesting.
Sounds like Inspire the Muse levels of work.
Yeah, that's true. Except if we don't get something done, we just lose out on opportunity. We don't get somebody yelling at us and suing us. Generally.
So far.
And I've also set up a recurring schedule for weekdays. So I was reading something about keeping all of your productivity and all your things to do during the weekday and actually taking time on the weekend to chill out and decompress. You know, a lot of the times what I do is when I come home from work, that's my decompression time, and then I try to catch up on the weekend, and then I don't actually have any fun on the weekends. And the decompression that I do on weeknights aren't really fun. It's more me watching TV or playing a video game, which, if I'm not recording a game break for said video game, is not very useful or productive. So I've sort of set up a recurring schedule of what I plan to do during the week and leaving the weekend totally open for fun stuff. It's important to keep a flexible schedule if you're going to make a schedule. Case in point, every day this week the schedule has been ruined in one way or another, as most schedules are. And it's just important to, you know, keep the thought in your head that your schedule is sort of a boilerplate for what you want to do, and that things come up and they're going to interrupt your schedule, and that's okay. And just pick it up where you leave off once you're done with that thing. For example, I have a thing where I run every day in the morning at a certain time at work. One day it literally was raining all day, so I couldn't go. And then today I was going to do it, except I had an all-day meeting at work, which kind of throws off my game of be at work for 12 hours but have 3-hour-long breaks where I can get stuff done. So that got messed up. And then, you know, yesterday was supposed to be an exercise thing, but we ended up doing a bonus not suitable for Word Ninjas podcast. That was really good. So I'm glad that I skipped out on exercising and did this. But the key is don't let this discourage me for the next day, or the next like 6 hours even. So in the, you know, my morning might have been ruined schedule-wise, but I can still pick it up in the afternoon. And the overall goal is to be very productive during the week and actually taking vegetation time on the weekend.
I'll be interested to see how that format works for you, because that's kind of what I've gotten into. I push everything, or I try to do as much as I can during the weekdays so that my weekend I can kind of go MIA. And it seems
Right.
to have
I feel
worked
like
for the
my
last few months.
decompression. Yeah, I feel like my decompression during the weekday every day has been kind of worthless. So I'll be interested to see if making the switch actually makes a difference. I probably won't be able to report back on it until September, because in August I have a bachelor party and a rehearsal dinner and a wedding.
And a convention.
All on Fridays. And a convention. Well, that was just on Fridays. And then I have a convention coming up right after that. So I'm not really going to have any veg time in August, it turns out. But September seems to be wide open for vegetation. So, and my wife will be back, so I'm sure we'll be able to vegetate together.
No, there's still Hartford Comic Con in September.
Yeah, well, at least I get the other weekends.
True. And then that's the last convention for the year. At least for us. What has Kelvin been up to since last Wednesday?
A lot of the same things that you were up to last weekend.
Yeah, a bit of an overlap.
But other than that, I don't know, just kind of vegged out. I'm still kind of recovering from the weekend, so trying to get my mind and my body back together, and work is not really helping because I've been having to like stay an extra hour and a half at work at least every day this week. It's trying to get projects and annoyances out of the way. So besides work stuff, I really haven't gotten any creative endeavors or any sort of major me time going.
There hasn't really been time for that.
It really hasn't.
I know on Monday I actually was able to get the day off, so I was able to take a quick nap, but I still spent a majority of the day being busy.
Mm.
And then yesterday was the interview right after work. There has been no downtime.
Whatever downtime there happens to be has been spent sleeping
Yeah.
or just passing out in place because that's happened too. So, next week will be another week.
Yes.
But this weekend was enough productivity for like 2 weeks, just from that drive alone.
Yeah, it definitely averages out.
Like, it took a lot out of me. Like, I can't even fathom how you're feeling.
It hasn't fully hit me, and it's probably not going to until I finally just sit down and relax, which unfortunately isn't probably going to be until Saturday, so that's just going to be unfortunate, but because there's stuff that needs to happen tomorrow. I need to be on for Friday for various things that I don't want to talk about on air, and then maybe Saturday I get to decompress.
Gotcha.
Maybe. Possibly. Probably not. And to our viewers and listeners, post in the comments, what have you been up to this past week? How have you been in your creative endeavors? And have you been to conventions? Have you traveled across time zones and whatnot recently? What have you been up to? Continue the conversations. Although I have a feeling that whoever is running the OTP manga account at the moment will have similar things to say compared to us, since they're currently popping in and out with comments. All right, next up, events. In 3 weeks, 2.5 weeks, somewhere around there, is Inconceivable in Northampton, Massachusetts. And you'll get to hear some of the things that they're planning and really excited for in the Not Suitable for Word Ninjas podcast episode coming out like Saturday or Sunday. It's close. It's going to be a quick turnaround for Will, unfortunately, to put that together.
I'll get it done.
I'm really excited for this one. And they've released the event schedule a while ago, and I took a peek at that today and figured out the ones that I really want to check out. And there's another half dozen I wouldn't mind at least peeking into. And we also have Hartford Comic-Con in September over in Hartford, Connecticut. And I'm effectively giving up on us getting press access there. So I'm just going to say at this point, officially, we're all attending as vendors because that is confirmed. But beyond that, it is what it is. We'll make the most of it as our last convention for the year. And we are already confirmed for EuroMiniCon 2016 in January. That one is in Meriden, Connecticut. And ConnectiCon 2016, which is also in Hartford, Connecticut. That's not until July of next year. And I tossed AkaiCon 2016 tentatively, since that's still a good ways out and anything can happen. So we'll see how that goes. And with that, hey, that's a full show. That's all we got for this week. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for episode 104. If we have entertained you in any way, shape, or form over the last hour and a half, subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can watch, comment, and thumbs up all of the various episodes and videos and shenanigans that we put up. If you're curious about convention stuff that we've done, I know AkaiCon stuff is probably going to go up either late this week or next, because we managed to get a few recordings and stuff. So keep an eye out for that. We also have the ongoing Game Break series. We have Muse Food posts on Saturdays. We have book reviews when we can put them up. And we are putting together some other stuff and segments and content for you all. So subscribe so you can be told when we're putting out new shiny things. If you want to talk to us via social media, we're over on Twitter at FCWordNinja, on Tumblr, fcwordninja.tumblr.com, and Facebook, facebook.com/fullcoveragewriters. Feel free to converse with us, talk to us, ask us questions that you want us to pose on the show for future talkie points. Or if there's interesting news articles or fundraisers or anything shiny on the internet that you'd like us to look into, by all means, send us a link, let us know, and we'll put it on a future episode. If you want to help fund our various crazy shenanigans and help us get to conventions in different time zones, check out the Etsy store, etsy.com/shop/fullcoveragewriters, where we have all of our various shiny baubles. So you don't have to necessarily make it to one of the conventions we're at. You can just go to the Etsy store and grab something right there, and we'll send it right over to you. And with that, if you want to find me for whatever reason, it's going to be tricky because I'm still running around like a headless chicken most of the time. But your best bet is still personal Tumblr, fancypantswolf.tumblr.com. Where can people track down Will?
You can usually find me on my personal Tumblr page at darkhom.tumblr.com. That is spelled DARKHOM. You can check out any work on my writings for My Roommate's a Stripper at myroommatesastripper.tumblr.com. And you can help support my own personal writings over at patreon.com/darkhom.
And how about Justin?
You can find me and all of my things at mechanicaljustin.com.
And how about Calvin?
I think Tumblr and Instagram are the best ways to find me at the moment. Tumblr is instacal.tumblr.com, and Instagram is ccwii. Yes, that.
And with that, thank you all for joining us for episode 104 of Word Ninjas Live. Come back next Wednesday for episode 105, where who knows what we'll be talking about and getting into. But until then, go be creative. Go have some fun so we can talk about it next week.
Yes.
That's the plan.
See ya, everyone.
Bye.